And it's all because I sent a heartfelt letter to him to tell him that I was dying.
Born in England, Lee Kerslake was destined to make a mark in the world of rock. He picked up the drumsticks at an early age, driven by an insatiable passion for music. Welcome back, rock fans. Today we dive into the extraordinary life and career of a legendary drummer whose beats still echo in the hearts of music lovers worldwide. This is the life and death of Uriah Heep's Lee Kerslake. Lee came to the knowledge that he had a great interest for music in 1958, while he was attending Winton and Moordown School for Boys. This discovery occurred during his time at the school. After being intrigued by the percussionist in the Ted Heath Band while he was attending a dinner dance, he turned his attention to playing the drums. Initially, he was interested in playing the piano, but after being captivated by the group, he decided to switch to playing the drums. When he was just 14 years old, he became a member of the Phantoms, which was his first band. He joined the band with his pals. In addition to wearing black clothing, they donned masks that were reminiscent of the ones that the Lone Ranger carried around with him. The Phantoms later morphed into a band that was known as Tony, Saturn, and the Planets. Composed of guitarists Martin Roswell and David Rawlings, bassist Jeff Adams, and vocalist Tony Letts, the band was able to continue their musical journey. This band went through a series of name changes during the course of its existence. Following the tryouts that were held at the Burlington Hotel in Boscombe in 1963, Lee was looking for musicians who possessed an exceptional level of technique to join his band. He was now searching for potential members to join his band. In the end, this resulted in the formation of a new band whereby guitarist Timothy Large, pianist Bob Michaels, bassist Bill Jacobs, and guitarist Graham Sid Austin were the members. Tony Letts was the one who remained to perform in his capacity as the vocalist throughout the entire run. They came to the idea they should abbreviate their name to track markings and give themselves the nickname Tony in the track marks as a consequence of Lee's mother's observation that the carpet was covered with muddy track markings. This was the catalyst for their decision. Eric, Lee's father, was not only the manager of the band but also in charge of arranging arrangements for performances and equipment. In addition, he was the manager of the band members. The band had their debut performance at Holdenhurst Village Hall on April 10, 1964. This was the first time they had ever performed there. Among the classics that they played were songs by artists such as the Beatles, Kinks, and Animals, amongst others. After Large, Michaels, and Jacobs left the band at the beginning of 1965, the Bob Michaels Band was formed. This was the beginning of the band's history. By the time Dave Anthony's Moods were formed, this band had already been formed. Following that, Lee and Letts recruited members of the Master Sounds, which included guitarist Graham West Douglas, bassist Ted Rawls, and keyboardist Gary Rice, all of whom were members of the band. As a result of Austin's departure from the band, none of the newly recruited members were able to successfully fill the void left by Austin's departure. Butlin's holiday camp in Bognor Regis was the location where the band showcased their talents during the course of the summer. A heat of the National Talent Contest, which was conducted by the People newspaper, was one of the competitions that they participated in and won during that time period. After winning the Clacton Regional Final, which took place in October, they went on to compete in the Grand Final, which was held at the New Victoria Theatre in London. They were victorious in all levels of competition. In spite of the fact that they were defeated by the comedian Dave Thomas, they were awarded a prize of £750 for finishing in second place among the competitors. With the money, they were able to purchase a brand new vehicle, which resulted in a substantial improvement in the convenience of their travel and transportation to and from performances. Following Tony Letts' departure from the band at the beginning of 1967, Ted Rawls assumed the role of vocalist, and Lee contributed harmonies to the overall composition. At the end of 1967, Lee was looking for ways to further his career, whether it was with the track marks or on his own. He was interested in discovering new opportunities. The moment that Paul Newton made his breakthrough was when he paid a visit to the Kerslake house after performing with track marks at the Pavilion Ballroom. This was the moment when he broke through. The promise that Lee would get a weekly income of £25 from his son Paul Newton's new band, The Gods, was made by Newton in order to entice Lee to join the band. This pay was higher than the one that Lee had previously received from his father's scrapyard. The opportunity presented itself, and Lee took advantage of it by packing his drum equipment and his clothing and traveling 60 miles to Andover, Hampshire, in order to meet his new bandmates. His excitement about the possibility was palpable. In the end, a school band from Hatfield that was known as the Juniors finally transformed into the Gods. The Gods consisted of the Glasscock brothers, bassist John and drummer Brian, second guitarist Alan Sharklock, and vocalist Malcolm Collins. One of the most notable members of the band was Mick Taylor, who would go on to join the Rolling Stones in the future. Mick Taylor quit the failing blues band in June of 1967 in order to become a member of John Mayall's Blues Breakers. These Blues Breakers were looking to replace Peter Green. This was the final straw that broke the camel's back for the band, which had been going through a series of personnel changes up to this point. Ken Hensley, who at the time was in charge of playing the piano for the Gods, moved to Andover, North Carolina, where he was forced to endure a miserable existence while living out of a van as he mulled about his decisions. Over the course of time, he made contact with bassist Paul Newton and his father, who was a prospective manager who offered to back them in the event that they were able to establish a new band. He was able to start a new band with Paul Newton. When Lee came to town, the guitarist Joe Corners, who had previously performed with Tony Ventures in the DCS, had already been hired. Joe Corners had previously played with both of those bands. In the fall of 1967, the band was able to secure a contract with the Harvey Block Agency, which enabled them to acquire a significant amount of work opportunities. One of these opportunities was a successful Saturday night engagement at the Marquee Club, which was situated on Wardour Street. Following an increase in the amount of work they had to complete, the band decided to relocate to London. Not only did Paul Newton go to join Mick Box and David Byron in Spice, but he also dragged his manager father along with him. In order to participate, Lee issued an invitation to his friend Greg Lake from Poole. However, Lake declined the request after a few months owing to a disagreement on the topic. Following that, Lake became involved in the development of King Crimson alongside Robert Fripp during the first stages of the production. The band's original bassist, John Glasscock, came back to the band as a result of this, and it happened only a few weeks before the band was supposed to record their debut album at Abbey Road Studios. The band's debut album, which was titled Genesis, featured a variety of musical styles, including progressive rock and psychedelic rock, among others. There was no success in acquiring recognition for the album, which was published at the same time as the song Baby's Rich, which was not included on the album. For the same reason, the public and the reviewers did not find the follow-up concept album, which was named Samuel A. Son, to be very impressive. In an unfavorable review that was published in Melody Maker, it was characterized as a poor attempt at a pop opera. Although they published songs such as a brass-adorned version of Hey Bulldog by the Beatles and Maria from West Side Story, the band was not able to achieve popularity in the music industry. This was despite the fact that they released these tunes. During the month of December in the year 1969, producer David Paramore recruited 3 members of the band, including drummer Brian Glasscock and percussionist Mike Rode, to record the album Orgasm under the identity Head Machine. And Head Machine was the name of the band. When the band was formed, they went under the moniker Head Machine. With regard to the project that Paramore was working on, he was the one who was responsible for coming up with all of the songs. It was originally intended to be the Gods' third album when it was initially made available to the public. On the other hand, those proposals were ultimately decided against. Hensley, who played the role of Ken Leslie, John Glasscock, who played the role of John Legend, and the 2 drummers, who participated under the title of the Poole Brothers, were some of the individuals that engaged in the activity. They created false identities in order to participate. There were names on the album that were regarded to be provocative, such as Climax and You Must Come With Me. The record was marketed as an erotic rock album. As an additional point of interest, it was characterized by loud rock music, with Hensley's noisy guitar performance being the distinctive aspect of the genre. In the years that followed, bassist Chaz Hodges, drummer Mick Burt, and drummer Dave Peacock came together to form the band Chaz Dave Music. Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers had previously earned 2 top 10 successes, one of which being a cover of the Beatles' song Got to Get You Into My Life. However, by 1969, the band had split despite having achieved both of these triumphs. Dave Peacock, Chaz Hodges, and Mick Burt were the pioneers in the formation of Chaz Dave. Bennett, together with Lee, Ken Hensley, and Joe Conis, who played bass, was the one who first created the band Toe Fat. Joe Conis was also a member of the band. Both the song Working Nights and the album of the same name were issued by them. The album cover was made by Hignosis, and the music itself was available for purchase. Parlophone in the United Kingdom and Rare Earth in the United States were the labels that signed them to record contracts. Prior to the release of their song, they had already inked contracts with both labels. The album did not attain the degree of success that producers had hoped for, despite the fact that it received favorable reviews. While Eric Clapton's Derek and the Dominoes were on tour in North America, they were giving support for the band they were touring with. In spite of this, Hensley resigned to become a member of Spice, and Brian Glasscock took over for Lee, who joined the National Headband upon his departure. Before the band disbanded, Toe Fat issued one more record before they went their separate ways. With the addition of Lee as a second drummer at Warner Bros., the backup band for Liverpool singer-songwriter Mike Hart, which included guitarist Neil Ford, bassist Dave Paul, keyboard player Ian Sheehan, and drummer John Skorsky, was able to expand their lineup. It was from the ashes of the business that the band was finally created, insisting on a certain item. In the album Albert I, Offord made an effort to incorporate a wide variety of musical influences into a single composition. Nevertheless, their efforts were not recognized. Except for Lee, who had been fired for drunkenness after winning a darts match during a gig in Scotland, the band disbanded after a tour that was poorly publicized. Lee was the only member of the band to be fired. Lee was the only member of the gang that was still alive. After some time had passed, she has joined Camel and Caravan, Paul joined Jonesy, and Lee found his place with Uriah Heep. All of these individuals became members of the band subsequently. Uriah Heep can trace its roots back to the year 1965 in East London, where guitarist Mick Box, bassist Ricky Hurd, guitarist Alf Rayner, and drummer Roger Penlington established the band Stalkers before going on to become Uriah Heep. Under those circumstances, the band that would ultimately be known as Uriah Heep was laid out. With the addition of vocalist David Byron Garrick in 1967, the band was able to complement their eclectic blend of rock and roll and pop songs with a voice that was uniquely their own. In 1968, Mick, David, and Alf, who were now playing bass, made the decision to take their band to the next level by renaming themselves as Spice and recruiting Nigel Pegram as their drummer. Paul Newton took over for Rayner almost quickly after that, and his father was in control of the band's business. Rayner had no idea what was going on. Newton's endorsement led to Ken Hensley joining the band from Toe Fat, and he did so after getting the referral. The band Uriah Heep, which was based on a figure from the works of Charles Dickens, was renamed by Jerry Brown as part of a joint management deal. But after Lee was released from his commitments as a result of a darts match that was heavily influenced by alcohol, the band had been attempting to get him to join them for a number of months until they eventually succeeded in doing so in November of 1971. In lieu of Pegram, Lee was appointed. Following that, a series of changes were implemented, the culmination of which was the bassist Paul Newton and his father being fired from their positions. Jerry Brown's establishment of Bronze Records was the catalyst for this event, which took place after he assumed full control of the situation. Mark Clark stood in for Newton for a brief amount of time before Gary Thine, who was born in New Zealand and is a member of the Keith Hartley Band, completed the roster. Thine is a member of the band. A middling career trajectory was followed by the band by the time they published their third album, which was named Very Heavy, Very Humble, Salisbury, and Look at Yourself. The album was released in the year 2000. Thine's complex bass lines and Lee's strong drumming, on the other hand, built a solid foundation that propelled them to the forefront of progressive and heavy rock music. This foundation was established via the assimilation of both individuals. Lee's explosive drumming and soaring vocals were displayed on 9 popular pieces on their fourth album. Demons and Wizards, which was a breakthrough record for the band, it was packaged in a Roger Dean cover and made it into the top 20. It was quickly followed by their fifth album, On the Magician's Birthday, which made it into the top 30 and finally went gold. Following the success of the singles The Wizard and Easy Living on the charts in the United States of America, Holland, and Germany, Lee embarked on a series of busy tours throughout the United States, Europe, and the United Kingdom in 1972. One of these tours included a memorable stop at Bournemouth Winter Gardens on May 26th, which was the first of 4 visits to Lee's hometown over the subsequent decade. The album Uriah Heep Live was published at the beginning of 1973, the same year that Uriah Heep began her tour of the United Kingdom where she was performing. The album was recorded in Birmingham Town Hall, and it was presented in a gatefold sleeve that was very stunning. The jacket was embellished with press articles that were critical of the band. The band's sixth studio album, which was titled Sweet Freedom and was produced in France for reasons connected to taxation, also made it into the top 20 of the list of albums that were released. On the other side, the band was struggling under the weight of their unrelenting obligations to both making recordings and going on tour. While Ken Hensley resorted to cocaine, David Byron turned to alcohol, Gary Thane turned to heroin, and Mick Box occasionally drank alcohol. All of these individuals were attempting to deal with the challenges that they were experiencing. Jerry Braun, Lee's manager, gave him the impression that he was being ignored in songwriting credits and that he was being marginalized throughout the process. Although there was major internal struggle and significant difficulties with drug abuse, Wonderworld was ultimately made available to the public in 1974. This was despite the fact that there were significant problems with substance misuse. When Mick Box thinks back on it, he admits that the band should have taken a break in order to recharge their batteries, but instead they continued their journey without making any stops. 3 weeks after receiving an electric shock in Dallas, Texas, Thane returned to the United States in a terrible state. He had been in Dallas for the previous 3 weeks. Even though he was on tour in the United States, the event took place at that time. Due to the fact that his heroin addiction had reached such a serious level that it had taken control of him, he was terminated from his position. To add insult to injury, Gary Thane passed away suddenly on December 8, 1975, when he was 27 years old. This was a devastating turn of events. It was a friend from Bournemouth named John Wetton who had just done a tour around the world with Roxy Music that had caused him to suffer from respiratory failure. He had been suffering from this condition for quite some time. I returned to Fantasy, which peaked at number 7 on the charts, and the less successful High and Mighty both contained contributions by Wetton. I Returned to Fantasy was the more successful of the two albums. The band achieved the highest chart position with their album Return to Fantasy. Throughout the time that Wetton was a member of the band, there were conflicts between the band's major songwriter, Hensley, and the dynamic vocalist, Byron. Byron was the one who was responsible for the band's songs. Because of these issues, the group's stability was put in jeopardy. 1 year later, Byron was sacked from the band due to his excessive drinking and erratic behavior, which culminated in an incident in Spain in which he destroyed a plate glass door. Byron's behavior led to the band's termination. In spite of the fact that the band was going through some internal conflicts, they continued to perform for an additional year. One of the players from Lucifer's Friend, John Lawton, stepped up to fill his role of responsibility. As a result of Wetton's discontent with the modifications, he made the decision to quit, and Trevor Bolder, who was a member of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, took up his job. The unfortunate reality is that David Byron would finally pass away on February 28, 1985, as a consequence of the challenges that he faced as a result of his decision to abstain from drinking alcohol. Firefly was recorded by the new band when they were present at Roundhouse Studios, with Brown acting as their guide throughout the process. As a consequence of his rough appearance, Lee was given the moniker The Bear, and he made his presence known with the song Who Needs Maine, which addressed his role in the band. In addition, he made his presence known by performing the song. As a result of their ballad-wise Man being a top 40 success and making an appearance at the top of the charts, everyone was taken aback. In addition, Lee became a face of Jägermeister in Germany by wearing a t-shirt that included the cover art of Firefly. This led to a rise in sales of the album, which in turn led to an increase in the number of copies sold. The film Innocent Victim, which was released at the end of the year, was a picture that was popular in Germany but had mixed reviews from critics when it was released there. The track Free Maine by the band reached number 3 on the charts in both New Zealand and South Africa, demonstrating its widespread appeal. It has been said that the eyes of Lee were featured on the cover of the book. The album Fallen Angel, which Lee released in 1978, was the last album that he had released with Uriah Heep since the beginning of the decade. In spite of the fact that he quit the band in the middle of ongoing arguments and manipulation behind the scenes involving Braun and Hensley, he contributed the heartbreaking song Come Back to Me, which was a reflection on the way his marriage ended. In the end, John Sloman took over for John Lawton after the latter resigned due to the constant issues he had with Hensley about the latter's insistence on having his wife along on the tour. Sloman's departure was a result of such arguments. As a result of Lee's absence, Chris Slade, who was a member of Manfred Mann's Earth Band, assumed the role of drummer. In the beginning, Lee had the goal of recording the songs that he had accumulated. However, His plans were changed when he received a phone call from Ozzy Osbourne's promoter, who requested him to join his band. When Lee accepted the offer, his ambitions changed. As a member of Ozzy, Lee joined forces with Randy Rhoads and Bob Daisley, and he was a part of the recording process for the albums Blizzard of Oz in 1980 and Diary of a Madman in 1981. The two CDs contain a total of 6 songs that were composed by Lee specifically. During the time when Lee and Daisley were touring Europe with Ozzy and Budgie, they made a request for Ozzy's then-manager, Don Arden, to pay for their living expenses in advance. This request was accepted. However, while they were out on a short holiday, the two individuals discovered that Sharon Arden, who had recently taken over as Ozzy's manager, had terminated their employment. Sharon Arden is the daughter of Don Arden. Lee claimed that Ozzy had requested that he deliver the word that he was unable to play 2 shows in New York City in a single night owing to the limits of his voice. Lee was unsure of the cause for his dismissal, but he did recall that Ozzy had requested that he send this information. Lee was someone who valued being in the band with Ozzy, and Lee was willing to do everything for him. Lee was prepared to do anything. What Lee did was exactly what he was instructed to do. On the other hand, Lee was of the opinion that Sharon continued to feel anger toward him even after the message was delivered to her. This was something that he remembers happening in 2011, and he most likely ascribed his displeasure to the fact that she had been fired from her work. Due to the fact that the names of Lee and Daisley were altered on the 2 record credits, there were legal battles that took place about royalties, despite the fact that lawsuits were launched in 1998 and reissues were issued in 2002. Lee became bankrupt as a result of the court battles. The contributions of Kerslake and Daisley were re-recorded by new musicians when the reissues were released. As a result of the objections that were presented by fans, the original contributions were brought back into existence in the anniversary reissues that were issued in 2011. Uriah Heep went out of business as a direct result of Lee's time spent associated with Ozzy. Following a period of inactivity, Mickbox once again got together Lee, Bob Daisley, John Sinclair, and Peter Golby to create the band of the same name. After receiving favorable reviews for their return album, Abomination, which was released in 1982, they were invited to perform at the Monsters of Rock Festival alongside Status Quo, Gillan, and Saxon. This performance was the culmination of their successful comeback. Adversity was something that Uriah Heep had to deal with during the second half of the 1980s. In order to work with Ozzy, Daisley resigned and Trevor Bolder ended up taking his position. On top of that, their record label Bronze went bankrupt, and the number of people who attended their tour in the United Kingdom decreased as a direct result of the tour. With Sinclair joining Daisley, Fontaine was able to temporarily take over Golby's position in the firm until Shaw assumed control of it. In spite of these challenges, they were able to keep their lineup relatively stable during a decade of tours that took them all over the world, including a performance that was particularly remarkable in Moscow. Raging Silence, Different World, Sea of Light, and Sonic Origami, which was Lee's final record with the band, were the 4 albums that were made by the band during the period in which they were experiencing a delay in their studio recordings. Over the course of the events that transpired on September 11th, 2001, Lee was present in New York City and observed the collapse of the World Trade Center, which was situated in close proximity to the hotel that he was staying in. The event that Lee had was one of great significance. It was because of this incident that he reassessed his life and the relationships he had with other people. While this was going on, Uriah Heep was busy putting together the details for a massive reunion event that was scheduled to take place at Shepherd's Bush Empire. The show was going to be named The Magician's Birthday Party. It was planned that former members Ken Hensley and John Lawton would be present for the event. The concert went ahead without a hitch, and Lee's change of perspective led to a reunion with Hensley, despite the fact that there had been problems in the past between the two of them. Over time, it was finally released on DVD and CD, and it is now considered to be an annual event today. Lee and Daisley, together with Steve Morse of Deep Purple and Jimmy Barnes of Cold Chisel, were the original members of Living Loud, which was established in the year 2003. During a period of time in their careers, they worked together on this partnership. During their time with Ozzy Osbourne, Lee and Bob collaborated on the creation of 6 songs that were included on their self-titled album, which was recorded in Florida. The album featured 5 new songs in addition to 6 tracks that were written collaboratively by Lee and Bob. There were just 2 concerts by Living Loud in Australia during the time that Deep Purple was on tour. While the first event took place at the Melbourne Metro, the second performance was hosted at Fox Studios in Sydney. Both events were held in Australia. Videos and audio recordings were taken of each of these concerts. During the succeeding 4 years, Uriah Heep was able to retake their status by touring widely across the continents of Asia, South America, Russia, and Europe. This allowed them to regain their standing. On the other hand, Lee's health difficulties, which included tinnitus and osteoarthritis, made touring becoming increasingly difficult, and he finally departed the band at the beginning of 2007. Due to the fact that he was replaced by Russell Gilbrick, Uriah Heep was able to continue their tour operations under the guidance of Mick Box, who was the sole original member of the band. The band Uriah Heep has been around for 55 years, and throughout that time they have sold more than 40 million CDs together. Due to the massive epidemic of the coronavirus, they were forced to postpone the celebration of their 50-year milestone, which they had planned to take place in the year 2020. Following his rehabilitation, Lee participated in Uriah Heep seminars conducted yearly in Spain with the legends. These conferences were held in Spain. Participating at these conventions were former members Paul Newton, John Lawton, and Kerslake, in addition to Phil Baker, who played the guitar instrument. He repeated these gatherings in Finland in 2009, 2011, and 2012, and in 2015 he continued them here in Belgium. In Finland, he organized these reunions. After that, he and Stefan Berggren, whom he had met for the first time while working on his master's thesis, went on to join forces and form the band known as Berggren Kerslake. In the year 2014, they worked together with bassist Thomas Torberg to create an album that was given the title The Sun Has Gone Hazy. Even after receiving a diagnosis of terminal prostate cancer in the latter half of 2018, Lee continued to stay active in spite of the fact that he was battling the disease. Among his other accomplishments, he collaborated with Jake Libretto on the production of a new song titled Elevantine and made an autobiographical documentary titled Not on the Heap. It was about this time that he sent a letter to Ozzy Osbourne, in which he told him of his health and conveyed his dying plea to acquire platinum plaques for the albums Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, both of which he had worked on but for which he had never received appreciation. He included this request in the letter. Lee's wish was granted by Ozzy, who wished him well and gave the platinum discs to his former drummer in the beginning of 2019. Lee's goal was fulfilled. On September 19, 2020, Lee, who had been battling cancer for 73 years, eventually died. It is with great regret that I share this news with you. Not only does he leave behind his wife Susan, but he also leaves behind 2 grandchildren who are now adults. According to Mick Box, the sole member of Uriah Heep, who was a founding member, Lee was not just a brother but also an outstanding drummer, vocalist, and songwriter before he passed away. Additionally, Mick Box conveyed the feeling that Lee was among the most charitable people on the entire earth. It was a man who had an unequaled zeal for life, and he was adored not just by those who followed him, but also by everybody who had the opportunity to interact with him. Lee Kerslake's life was a symphony of highs and lows, beats and rhythms that continue to resonate. He may be gone, but his spirit and music will forever be etched in rock history. Thank you for joining us in celebrating the life of Lee Kerslake. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into the legends of rock.